Jim Sampson, welcome to the Fiduciary You podcast. Thanks so much for being a guest today.
Thanks for having me, Josh.
You and I actually met for the first time a couple of weeks ago down at the Wealth at Work conference. We somehow or another, we drew the short end of the stick and both got put on a crypto and 401k panel, which actually turned out to be a really, really good panel discussion overall. But we were both top advisor by participant outcomes by 401k specialist in 2021. And you actually were named the TAPO of the year by 401k specialist and left the rest of us in the dust. And so I was like, well, man, this guy he's a good dude. Plus he must be really special. So let's get him on the podcast. So I'm really excited about our conversation today.
I'm looking forward to it. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Good stuff. So for listeners, maybe talk a little bit about your director of retirement services at Hilb Retirement Group. Maybe talk a little bit about your background. You've actually got a really cool story we talked about before we started recording about how you kind of got into the industry. Yeah. Maybe give a little bit of background about kind of who you are, and you've been doing this a long time. How'd you, I'll call it, stumble into the retirement space?
Sure. So I was actually working in retail after college. And a good friend of mine that I had grown up with, in high school, and he called me out of the blue one day and he says, "Hey, you looking to get out of retail? My firm is hiring. Do you know anything about 401k?" I said, "I can spell it." And he says, "Well, I know you're good with numbers. We were always in, higher level math classes together. And, he and I ran the NCAA basketball tournament pool in high school together. So, and we were running fantasy football leagues together. So he knew I was good with numbers. And so I ended up going to work at his firm. And, funny story about how I got the job. We were in a fantasy football league, and most of the guys in the league were either friends from high school or my college buddies, where with those guys, nothing is off limits. And there was one guy in the league who worked at Chris's firm, my friend Chris. And he was just kind of fly on the wall watching, the spectacle of a bunch of knuckleheads doing a fantasy football draft. And he was sitting right next to me the whole night. And at one point, he drafted a guy that was retired. And without even thinking, I just kind of looked at him and said, "Oh, you better get his backup. That guy's retired." And the room exploded in laughter. And I kind of felt bad afterwards because I'm like, wait a minute, this isn't one of my old buddies that I can just bust his chops freely. So I felt kind of bad about it after the fact. But so when my friend Chris called me and asked me to come interview, he says, "Oh, yeah, you know Jimmy T from our fantasy football league?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "That's who you're going to interview with." So I go in for my interview, and I'm a little nervous about the whole thing. And we sit down, and I'm like all friendly with him and stuff. And as soon as we sit down, he has a stern look on his face, and he says, "So, you want to talk about that retired kicker I drafted?" And after he let me sweat for a couple seconds, he goes, "I'm just kidding. I'm busting your chops. That was hilarious." And needless to say, I ended up getting the job. But so that's how I got into the world of 401k, working at a third-party administration firm in the Boston area.
Awesome. And then you did that for a couple of years. You moved over to the wholesaler side, went to work for Transamerica, both as an internal and then an external. And then you wound up deciding to kind of move on to the advisory side of the business. What kind of prompted that? What made you, and this I think was early 2000s.
Yeah.
What was it that kind of got you over the hump and made you decide you wanted to go in that direction?
Yeah. So it was in 2003. What I realized was, I was working at Transamerica, and Transamerica was one of those progressive record keepers that was talking about this new thing called new comparability, where most record keepers would just kind of leave that to the third-party administrator. We were talking about as a record keeper. And what I found was I was going out and, brokers were bringing me out to sell plans, and they would literally bring me in and say, "This is Jim. He's my 401k guy. Go get it, kid." And they would literally bring me in. I would do the entire sale. I'd do the plan design. I'd do the investments. I literally did everything start to finish. And those guys got paid. And I'll never forget, there was one.
Got to be the hero.
Exactly. They're the good guy. I'm just the schlep behind the scenes doing all the work.
Right.
And I'll never forget, I sold a fairly large plan at the time with a broker with this, old time restaurant that, in that local area, it was an institution. And we sold the plan. And I'll never forget, the broker made, I don't know, something like $30,000. The general agent who introduced me to the guy 3 years prior got a check for like $22,500. And I think I got paid like $7,000. And I said, I'm on the wrong side of this.
Right.
I figured that, I'm going out there and trying to shove the square peg in the round hole constantly because I have one product to sell. Whereas if I go over to the advisory side, I can design the peg to fit the hole no matter what it is. So that was kind of my motivation for making that happen. So in middle of 2003, I jumped ship and I went and worked at a employee benefits firm as their 401k guy.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's interesting. I had Janya Stout on the show a few weeks ago. And Janya and I actually live she just moved, but we lived about 1.5 miles away from each other, and have been good competitors, kind of frenemies within the business, but personal friends for a long time. And I originally met her. She was actually at Fidelity, and she was a rock star wholesaler, and she had a pretty similar story. Was that she got to a point where she wanted to felt like she could make a bigger difference in the industry, being on the advisory side as well. So it's interesting, just your kind of transition, because I and you may have the same. Like I have over the years had a lot of wholesalers on the record keeping side that are like, I really want to get into the advisory business. Historically has been kind of a good well-paying gig on the record keeping side, the wholesaling side. And, they just kind of feel like they're stuck because they probably make too much money to be able to go kind of start over and get into the advisory side, even though that might be a better long-term play for them. You and I are similar ages. So, when you got into the side of the business, you were not right out of school, but still kind of on the younger side of your career. So it's probably good timing to do it.
Yeah. I took the 50% pay cut when I went from wholesaler to advisor. Yeah. And I guess I'm probably fortunate I only took a 50% pay cut, right? Because, I talk to record keeping wholesalers all the time. And the struggle is that they're used to making that really nice base salary, great commission structure. They got all the perks, the car, the corporate card, all that fun stuff. To come over to the advisory side with no book of business, you're basically starting at zero.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
That's a really tough pill to swallow.
Right. Yeah. Though I have seen that the advisors who can that make that move are in a really good position because they've got strong existing relationships, and if you can get over that hump, it's just like starting any business, right? Most businesses, I think 95% of small businesses fail within the first 5 years, usually because they're undercapitalized. But if you can give this business enough time, and that's it's funny. Everybody thinks it's, this is not a overnight type of thing. But if you can give it enough time, if you can commit, let's say 5 years to really mastering your craft and, putting the work in, phenomenal career. Yeah. So you went to the benefits side, and from that perspective, and then, one of the things you guys started a retirement group, and then I think a number of years ago, you guys merged into Hilb, correct?
Yeah. So we had started. I had partnered with some benefits guys back in 2009, and we started Cornerstone Retirement Advisors. It was a kind of a subsidiary of Cornerstone Group, which is a big benefit shop. Mm-hmm. And so we ran Cornerstone Retirement Advisors from 2009 to 2015. And we were looking to merge with a local property casualty agency. And to do so, we needed to get some outside funding. And instead of going and just joining one of the big firms, we went out and we partnered up with a private equity firm. And they said, hey, we really love what you guys are doing, but you're just too small to do a deal for what we need to do. And they said, but hey, we've got this group down in Richmond, Virginia. I think they're in your business and they're trying to do the same thing. Why don't we put you together and make one big deal? And that's how we met the Hilb Group in Richmond. And we decided we all merged with them. And, that was, as they say, the rest is history. So the Hilb Group has been buying up property and casualty agencies as well as benefit shops for the last 6 years plus, and just growing like a weed. We've already had private equity partners swap out once. We're now backed by Carlyle, which is kind of the 800-pound gorilla. So we're growing like crazy. We've got great resources. It's an unbelievable opportunity. And the fun part for me is that I get to run the retirement group and work with all of the benefit shops across the entire Hilb Group footprint. So I've had a chance to build some really good relationships with some super smart, successful people. And it's great for them because they never had the opportunity to be able to offer 401k, amongst a number of other things we do, but they've never had 401k as an offering before. And so it's like a whole new world for these guys to be able to say, hey, we've got a 401k expert we can bring in. So it's been a fun ride.
So you brought up a couple of things just being interested that I think will be interesting to talk about. So one is just private equity. Obviously, and I've talked about this on other episodes as well, but there's a massive amount of money going into the retirement industry across all channels from a PE perspective. Yeah. Love to hear kind of your perspective of what the good and the bad of kind of being with a PE-backed shop is, and what the experience of like when those private equity partners turn, because, by definition, private equity isn't a long-term investor
right.
per se. So what that looks like. And then let's talk a little bit about just the convergence, right? The P&C, the health, the retirement. We obviously hear a lot about convergence and some of the other firms probably on the retirement side, some of the other aggregators are Hilb is a really big firm in terms of, hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. I would say maybe in some ways, maybe less well known in the retirement side than the P&C and the benefits side. But what has that experience been like? And in a lot of ways, it sounds like obviously you probably still pick up direct clients that you initiate those new relationships with. But it sounds like in a lot of ways, you've cultivated relationships with these benefits folks that have relationships with, the end user plan sponsor, and you're able to kind of come in and be accretive to that relationship. So maybe talk a little bit about that experience as well, and kind of what you've learned in terms of building those relationships on the benefit side. And what are the things that have kind of worked well, and what are the things where, if they haven't worked well with certain benefits folks, why?
Yeah. So what's interesting is, most of the business that I've done over the last, call it 2, maybe 3 years, it's almost all referral based. And it goes back to what I was saying before about how all of a sudden you've got all these benefit shops that have been around for years and years, very successful, super smart people. And all of a sudden they get a new toy to play with. And all of a sudden
You're the new toy.
I'm the new toy. But they all of a sudden they're like, well, wait a minute, we can create a new revenue stream. The way I explain it to these guys is, look, they've already said yes to you for many years. Mm-hmm. We're just going to add one service to the benefits offering that they have, because 401k is a benefit. And it's just a little bit different. It's kind of the land of the misfit toys here. But so there are some shops in our network that they have just totally latched onto this opportunity. And they are always talking about it. They're very proactive about it. Not everybody is, and that's okay. There's still a lot of benefits folks that, they kind of stay in their lane, and they make sure they take care of their clients on their expertise, which is the benefits. And it's a little more of a reactive process on my end, where, if a client says, hey, do you guys do, or I heard you did 401k, 403b, whatever it might be. Can you help us out? They'll reach right out to me, and we'll get something going with them. But again, it's been a lot of fun getting to know people from all around the country, really. We've got offices from New England all the way down to Florida and as far west as Michigan and Indiana now. So, we're slowly but surely starting to make our way west. But along the East Coast, that's really the focus. And our M&A team in Richmond has just done a fantastic job, vetting out these groups, because it seems like every group they bring on is just super high quality. They're just, they know their stuff. They're really good at what they do, and they're great people. So that has been a lot of fun for me. Because
do you insult them in their fantasy football drafting style at the first meeting? Or
I usually wait till the second meeting to do that.
A little second meeting.
Yeah. Usually the second meeting, I'm busting their chops about something. But
that's smart. That's smart.
But
have you spent time in some ways? If I think about this, it's kind of like those benefits folks are kind of like those benefits folks are kind of like, so that you can kind of, not all that different. Obviously, you're still the advisor, but probably similar to what you learned back in the day, wholesaling, right?
Yeah, that's
being kind of being a good partner. Have you, do you spend time trying to train those folks to understand how to identify good opportunities and then essentially be able to go kind of pre-sell, as opposed to, hey, let me just introduce you to Jim? Are there some of them that you've kind of taught to really do some of the legwork for you?
Yeah, it's funny. I find myself more and more going back to my wholesaler days, where they own the relationship and they're just bringing me in as the product specialist, and we go in. The difference is that we can, we're not limited to one product, and it's no longer sell it and move on. We have to take ownership of that client service experience on an ongoing basis. So our team has to really focus on making sure we're doing our job, not only so we don't lose our client, but also so that somebody else doesn't lose a client. Because if we screw up, we could be putting their business at risk. And that's a big responsibility. And our team is obviously up for it. We recognize that. So we have to make sure we take extra special care of these folks. So it's really helped us up our game, which is, obviously has been a great thing for everybody involved. But yeah, I absolutely see myself, putting on that wholesaler hat quite often, whether it's at a corporate training event, or whether it's just, hey, I'm visiting an office and I'm going to get together with some folks and talk about, hey, here's some of the things we see. I like to share a lot of case studies with people, just an example of, hey, here's a group that we did, because that might trigger somebody's memory. Oh, wait a minute, I got a group like that. It might get them to think about going to talk to that group about it. But I think that, when we first start working with a group, so as not to overwhelm them, especially because they're probably very new to the Hilb group. So just onboarding with us is like drinking through a fire hose. So I usually try to make it very simple for them to say, hey, look, just, when you're talking about 401k, just get as much basic information as you can, but at the end, just make an intro, whether it's make an email introduction. If you want to do a Zoom call introduction, we can do that. And I always tell our folks, I always give them the option. You can be as involved as you want or as passive as you want. So if you want to be on the intro call, I'd love to have you. Make a nice, smooth transition. If you just want me to run with it, I'll run with it. Fully capable of doing that. So, we have some of each, and whatever it is, that's okay. A lot of times, they have a really good relationship. They're like, look, I made the introduction, run with it. Go ahead. I trust you. The more and more they do it, the more and more they learn. And now they start to know some of the things we're looking for. They know some of the data points to collect. They know some of the buzzwords, which is really cool when they start to pick those things up. So, obviously that always gears towards finding, better prospects, which make better clients. We love an educated client because it makes it easier for everybody. So that's been a fun part of what I'm doing, is not just meeting all these new prospects and clients, which is awesome. But again, building relationships with all these folks in our organization, so that, when we do actually get to see each other, not on a computer screen these days, it's a lot of fun to actually see people in person. So,
yeah. So there's a number of different things, and I want to get back to this idea of, I love what you said, like we love an educated client, and you've got, we were talking before we started recording, and I think some similar philosophies in terms of trying to make the complex simple. But before we kind of transition to that, what have you found just in terms of this kind of Zoom world and just the sales process in general? If you've got an existing relationship with someone and it's more of like a touching base, or like with a plan sponsor committee meeting where it's more of like an informational kind of check-in or whatnot, and there's familiarity, Zoom will suffice. But I found that if you really need people to make decisions, or you need to influence people, being remote is really, really hard. And if you're trying to, sell remotely, it's really interesting. What's been your experience kind of with that during the pandemic?
So we had our biggest year from a sales perspective in 2020, and we're going to blow that out of the water this year. And it's been almost entirely virtual. And the only way that happens is the great relationships that our people have with their clients. The fact that, as you mentioned, they already have a relationship. The client has already said yes to their services, and they really value the services that our teams are bringing to the table. For them to make an introduction for a new line of business has actually been a lot easier than you would expect.
Do you think it's because that relationship exists, as opposed to, let's say you source a new plan sponsor directly yourself, not through one of the benefits relationships, let's say, and they don't have any relationship with Hilb? Is that a different story?
It's a lot harder to do that in a virtual world because you don't get to, when you're in the room with somebody, you get to read their visual, their body language. You get to read the visual signs they're giving you. That's almost impossible to do through a computer screen. It's half the time, especially if they have their screen off, if they have the camera off, you're talking to a wall, literally.
Yeah. If they don't give you the courtesy of turning on their camera, probably not getting that deal.
Unless there's something really, pressing behind the scenes where they need you. Yeah, it's probably not going to go as well. So again,
people tell me I have a great face for radio. They prefer when my camera's off, but
Oh, I've been told I got a face only a mother could love. So I hear you, but it's one of those things where, again, our whole business is such a relationship business, and that really is everything to us, is that relationship. Because without that, it's almost impossible to do, from the shoulders up. It's almost impossible.
Yeah, absolutely. You as we were talking before, and you used a couple of phrases that I love, but one of your philosophies is around simplifying the complex. Maybe talk a little bit about that, because we were going back and forth and just talking about how, kind of as an industry, we try to make things more complex than they need to be, because we think it makes us sound smart, not realizing that in many ways it does the exact opposite of what we intended to do. So talk a little bit about your philosophy around that, because I think it's a good one. And I think especially advisors would benefit from kind of hearing the way you kind of approach things.
I've always been of the belief that we as an industry try way too hard to come up with the next silver bullet, the next magic mousetrap. this is going to be the new thing that's going to dominate the 401k industry, and everybody's going to do it this way. And so much of that stuff has been a check the box so you can say you have it, but no one ever uses it.
Right.
And
Right.
I think that we overcomplicate things way too much. The reality is the very vast majority of employers that we work with and their employees, they just don't get this stuff. And that's okay. It's not taught at a high school level. It's not taught at a college level, at least not universally. It should be. I have a freshman in high school right now who all he does is squawk about some of the classes he has to take. And, while as a parent, I have to tell him, yes, you have to do your homework and do the classes. Privately, I'm thinking to myself, he's never going to use this again in his life. Why can't we teach him about investing? Why can't we teach him about budgeting? Basic stuff that every person needs to know. So I think we overcomplicate things. And you mentioned the whole, coming in and sounding smart. Prior to COVID, when we did all our meetings in person and, wearing a suit in every meeting. And, I would always tell clients, I'd say, look, when we come in and talk to your employees, we understand that most of them have never been taught anything about savings or investing. And the first time most people get an education on this topic is when the funny looking guy in the suit walks in and tries to explain it to them at their first job.
Yeah.
For many of the employees in the room that day, that's going to be them, because they haven't been trained in this kind of stuff. So we need to really simplify everything. I always joke that we need to Fisher Price the heck out of everything. And it's because most people just don't get it. And I remember when I learned it, I mentioned that, when I got my first job in 401k, the best I could do was spell it. And so I remember back to those days and how I learned it. And, I've always said that my greatest joy in this business is when I do an education meeting and I go from being the teacher in Ferris Bueller's class, where everybody's completely checked out. Half the people are drooling on their desk, but I go from that to all of a sudden seeing the facial expressions change, and you can actually see the light bulb going over somebody's head. That is the coolest thing going, when you can actually see that happen. That only happens if we simplify things to a level that everyone can understand. So I always use a lot of stories and analogies to take something that's a complex topic and bring it down to the level that everyone can understand. So I think that everything we do, from the way we run our business to the way we work with our employer or clients and to the way we speak to the employees, we really try to simplify everything to its absolute bare bones components to just make sure that everybody gets it. We talked about that lowest common denominator and making sure that, we design the plan for that person who's least likely to get any of this stuff. So,
yeah, that was, as we were talking, that was one of the, and you have a similar philosophy, but, back in the day, I used to talk with committees and I would ask them, I'd say, I want you to think of the least sophisticated employee at your company. You don't have to give me their name, but I just want you to think, do you have somebody in mind? And everybody would nod their head. And I would say, we need to design this plan from, the services that are offered to the fees, to the investments, to how we design the plan, really with that person in mind, and make sure that they don't, how do we put guardrails up so that or bumpers? I have 4 kids as well. My oldest is a sophomore in high school. My youngest is 7. But when my daughter was in kindergarten, I took her to a birthday party. It was at a bowling alley, and you've probably been there as well. Anybody who has kids have probably gone to the birthday party at the bowling alley, and they put up bumpers, right? Yeah. For the kids. And they put those bumpers up so those kids knock down pins, because they know if they just throw gutter balls the entire time, the kids aren't going to have fun. They're going to hold their breath. They're going to stamp their feet. They're going to throw temper tantrums. And I remember afterwards, we got in the car and I asked my daughter, I was like, did you have fun? And she's like, that was awesome. Like, I want to have my birthday party here, because she had so much fun. She thought she was, going to go on the PBA. She was, throwing strikes all the time. I'm not sure she was good, but because those bumpers basically guided the process. And I remember saying, like, the bowling alley wasn't dummies. They engineered the process in a way that they knew it was going to be a good outcome and a good experience. And I think that's, too often, to your point, I think advisors, even companies, they want to make things way more complex. But if we think about, instead of forcing those and sophistication is not the same thing as being smart, right? You can be smart. I think there's an elegance in simplicity, and there is a real sophistication. But if you can engineer so that call it that less sophisticated employee doesn't have to kind of level up. The people who are sophisticated, they'll figure it out on their own. But if you can design a plan in a way that makes sure that person, that least sophisticated person, doesn't throw a gutter ball with their retirement savings, that's a winning value prop. And I've always found, probably like you, that plan sponsors really connect with that. There's a great saying by Woody Guthrie, and he said, it's simple to make things complex, but it takes true genius to make the complex simple.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Most of my clients, you're always trying to find out what differentiates you with folks. And I would always say that, if you ask most of my clients, what do you like the most about working with Jim? They will say it's because we understand what the heck he's talking about. And that's a big deal in our world because, how many acronyms do we have? We live in acronym hell. We got fancy terms for everything. And for some reason, we just love to tell people how smart we are by rattling all that stuff off. And we might as well be speaking another language. So
the first time I went on Retireaholics, I've been on there a couple of times, and I went in kind of like eyes, wide shut. And they have this acrosin, right? If you use like an acronym, they call it acrosin, you have to like drink from I have like whiskey. Like I'm not a big drinker, but like I use so many acronyms on that first show until I figured it out. Like by the end of it, like I went back and watched the video. It was not pretty. But I agree with you. Like the constant use of acronyms is, there's something about when you can make things simple that it builds, right? It builds trust. It builds, there's a level of vulnerability when somebody doesn't feel like you're talking over their head. And, at the end of the day, like you said, this is very much a relationship business. I think the most successful advisory firms are the ones that can deliver trust at scale. And a lot of that starts with, how we speak and the words that we use. And even to your point, like, hey, is there this connotation of somebody coming in with a suit and a tie and it being kind of stuffy, instead of making it engaging. And that, I think, is another point where I think you're really on, like, it's no wonder you've had the success you've had, is just this idea that, if you can teach people, if you can educate people, one of the things you said early on was that people learn by doing. So that's a great point. What's your philosophy in terms of not just how to kind of talk at people, talk over their head? Obviously you're trying to make things more simple, but what do you do and how do you approach not just the teaching, but helping people learn? And you got a cool philosophy in terms of like why people need to like kind of skin their knees and bruise their elbows when they learn. How do you do that?
So, there's that old saying, you can't learn to ride a bike in a manual. You got to get on the bike, you got to ride it. And guess what? You're going to fall down a couple times. You're going to scrape your knees up. You're going to go over the handlebars. That's part of the learning process. And if we can kind of take some of that out of the equation for folks and help them learn from others' mistakes, hopefully we can make a smoother ride for them. But you mentioned something that I firmly believe in, and that's just, it's the words that we say. And I know you've seen the studies that have been done in our industry about this, but it really comes back to some really simple stuff. For example, the term plan sponsor. Now, you and I know exactly what that means. Anyone in our industry knows exactly what that means. Guess who doesn't know what that means? Plan sponsors. They're employers. They're not plan sponsors, they're employers. And they don't employ participants. They employ employees. So we need to call them that.
Great
One
point.
of the things I picked up on a handful of years ago, and I've really tried to incorporate it in everything we do. There is an evil, ugly F word in our industry: fees. It's a word we don't use. We don't have advisory fees. We have a cost for our advisory services. And it all goes back to the fact that if you think of the word fee, what pops into your mind? Probably your cell phone bill, your utility bill, where they've got fee after fee after fee just lined on that.
My 4 kids, that's what pops into my mind.
Yeah.
My 4 kids.
So people think when they hear the word fee, it just carries a negative connotation. But everybody readily accepts and understands that things have either a cost or a price. And no one seems to be offended by those things. So I always try to replace the F word with cost or price because it definitely makes for a smoother conversation and just people accept it a lot more. So that's one. Those are some examples of things that we do. But we really, we try to eliminate the acronyms. If I use an acronym, I always follow it with what the acronym stands for. So that, and then like for example, we talk about the ADP test, which, by the way, not to be confused with the payroll company, because people confuse that one all the time. And then I explain to them what the average deferral percent test is and why it's important. And, when I explain that, it's, we could sit there and get into the math of it and we'd completely have people head spinning. So I always explain it as it's like a seesaw. You take the big kids and put them on one side. You take all the little kids, you put them on the other side. And the seesaw's got to do this. I got to get my hands on the camera here. It's got to do this, right? It can't be, one way or the other. So people tend to get those mental
That's
visuals.
an awesome analogy. That's an awesome analogy, by the way. I have one of my mentors for a long time has said, he or she who controls the metaphor controls the conversation. And I think that I posted a video on LinkedIn last week that I was intending. I thought I was going to catch a bunch of arrows. I was actually surprised at how well people kind of responded to it. But it was back to the words that we use within the industry. And what kind of got me going, and I've been guilty of using plan sponsor and participant, but this idea, a lot of the talk that we're hearing in certain corners of the industry is around who owns the participant, who owns their data, and then quickly followed after, and this was the kind of the crux of the video, quickly after that is how do we monetize, you and I were at a conference together where like those words were being used, they're showing up in articles. And quite frankly, it just kind of pissed me off because I feel like that's kind of offensive. Like nobody owns participants. Nobody owns their data. And this idea of like, how do we monetize, even though the intent might be good, we want to help more people, but this idea of how do we monetize the participant, which it is, I think it's offensive. And I think it, quite frankly, I think that, like we shouldn't be looking at American workers as, financial targets with bullseyes on their back. And that's what I said. But one of my observations is that the words that we use matter, right? Because words influence our thoughts and our thoughts shape our beliefs. And ultimately what we believe drives our behavior. And I love what you bring up there in terms of like the words being cognizant, especially as advisors within the industry that have really been, I think, the standard bearers of what it means to be fiduciaries and put the interest of American workers before our own. But we have to be very careful in the industry about the words that we use because it matters. Ultimately, we may not think it matters, but it does ultimately, it will help drive, or it will determine and drive the types of behavior that we engage in.
Yeah, I mean, we're the translators, right? I mean, people are looking at us as the subject matter expert. We're the ones who have to translate this complicated, I mean, how big is the Internal Revenue Code? Thousands of pages. And,
Right.
We get to deal with this one subsection 401 parentheses K. And we have to interpret all that stuff for these people. And how many rules do we have in these plans that make no common sense whatsoever? So we have to translate all that stuff. And if all we're doing is parroting the same technical terms that the code has or that kind of, we're not helping anybody. So
right.
we have to be the translator. So we really have to simplify the message. And I can't overemphasize that enough. Because I've been in a room where somebody got up and just wanted to tell everybody how smart they were. And it was Ferris Bueller's class. And everybody checked out. And nobody got anything out of it. It was a total waste of everybody's time.
Do you think the person who got up thought they crushed it, though?
Totally. They walked out
right.
of there. And it's funny. I remember this happening, and I looked at the guy after the meeting. I said, how do you think it went? The guy was like, freaking nailed that thing. It was awesome. And it goes back to another lesson I learned a long time ago. It goes back to the concept of we have 2 ears and one one mouth. Use them in that proportion. It's funny, if you go into a meeting and you let the other person talk, the likelihood of them thinking it was a successful meeting goes way up. So I think a lot of my wholesalers probably take that approach with me. So how are the kids doing? How's this season going? And then they just sit back and let me go. And I'll walk out of there going, wow, that was a great meeting. It's the simple things that we really got to put more of a focus on, to be successful, quite honestly.
Right. Let's transition. I think that was a great discussion. And I think, especially for advisors who are listening to the episode, I think there's, even if I were you, I would take the seesaw analogy. I think that was awesome. And I think there's a lot of other good sound bites. One of the things that we were kind of prepping and discussing before the episode started was, you talked about employee education, and just earlier you talked about how, in terms of maybe the feel good, in terms of knowing where maybe you get the greatest joy is when that light bulb moment can happen when you're kind of face to face with an employee and they start to get it. And there's a lot, and I think a lot of advisors feel that way as well. More and more advisors, everybody's battling over the participant. That's where these, quite frankly, dumb comments like who owns the participant and monetize and all that stuff comes from. You guys are big on employee education, but you've basically let advice be kind of the realm of record keepers to this point, and been more of taken the approach of instead of us delivering the advice, let's make sure that there is an advice service or program within our plans. And then let's really be more of a traffic cop with employees when they do express interest in that how to point them in the right direction and have a service that's available for them to take advantage, assuming that they want that. Talk a little bit about that decision, because a lot of advisors are saying we need to own that. We need to bring that in-house. You've taken a little bit of a different approach. What drove that?
I think a lot of it goes back to the fact that as a practice, we do not do wealth management. We don't have a wealth management arm. We're not chasing rollovers. We're not chasing outside accounts. In fact, one of the things that I will tell an employer when we're starting to work with them is, while we're going to control the employee education campaigns, we generally don't let the record keeper run those campaigns. Unfortunately, I used to do that. And what I've found is that a lot of those, there's a lot of PowerPoint slides and, again, going back to a lot of that jargon.
They kill it, though. They crushed it.
Yeah, they killed it all right. The meeting was dead. So we run the entire education process, and we almost never use PowerPoint slides. It's always a conversation. And so we're focusing on trying to get people to a finish line, because we recognize that's going to be the starting line of another journey. I see our duty as getting people to the finish line safely, so that they can start their next journey with some certainty and some confidence.
You're like a retirement Sherpa.
So, but because we don't do the wealth management piece of the puzzle, we're not out there trying to tell people we're the smartest investment people going. I'm a retirement guy who learned investments, not the other way around. I started in this world
Right.
as a TPA. I was learning that side of it, and then I learned record keeping. Then I came to the investment and advisory side. So, we're really trying to get people to that finish line. So it's, when we go in and do an employee education session, I really try to focus on what I think are the three things that most people want to know that are sitting in that room. What's in it for them? How much should they save? And where should they invest their money? And I will often start a meeting by saying, these are the three things I'm going to talk about. If I hit these three things, is everybody in the room cool? And most people do this. Shake their head up and down. Yep, that's good. Give me what I need to know so I can get the heck out of here and go back to all the work that's sitting on my desk waiting for me. So we're really going to try to focus on those basic things. When it comes to the different types of investors, I think we all would recognize there's a couple different types. There is the do it for me, right? I don't want to know how the pizza's made. I just need to know what kind I want. They're going to use a target date fund, right? Then there's going to be the help me do it. Maybe they're going to be somebody who, picks their mix of funds every year or so, maybe every other year, tweak it here and there, not going to pay a ton of attention. Maybe they're suited for a managed account program. And then there's the do-it-yourselfer who they don't want my advice. Maybe they'll use me as a sounding board. But for the most part, they feel like they don't even need me. And that's okay. We'll be there when they do. And if they don't, that's all right. So people generally fall into one of those categories, and we feel that there's an appropriate solution. I mentioned the target date investor. I think one thing that we've noticed over the years in our practice, and definitely I've noticed it through the industry, is people tend to look at target date funds as a consolation prize. And that's not what it is. Target date funds have a very meaningful purpose. There is a reason so much money goes to target date funds. And it's because people don't understand how this works. They maybe, even if they do understand it, they don't want to take the time to manage it. They just want someone who's going to do it right and do it for them. And
it's been interesting too. You've seen a lot of folks in the industry starting, and I really appreciate what you said. So much in life is being able to identify potential conflicts and understand incentives. Like that is just kind of basic human nature. If you can understand where people have a dog in the fight and you can understand what their incentives are, you typically have a good framework to evaluate what's kind of being told. You guys you don't have a wealth practice. You're not trying to do the convergence while Hilb is doing convergence of, health and retirement and PNC. You're not throwing the wealth into the mix there. So if you're not trying to do that, then, record keepers who obviously are trying to get into that side of the business, like they're, you just want the participant. You don't have a dog in the fight, right? We're not trying to do this for you. Therefore, we just want to make sure that what's available and you can get to it, as necessary, and that kind of alignment of incentives. I think what you're seeing is in the industry, people starting to hate on target date funds and to talk about managed accounts like they are, this far better mousetrap. And I think that remains to be seen. There is promise with more personalization, but how often have you seen managed accounts where there's maybe a couple of different data points that are plugged in and it doesn't kind of live up to the promise, and it's just a high price target date fund? I actually think target date funds have been by far one of the best innovations within the industry, especially when you start to pair up automatic plan design, which has driven a lot of the flow. And, you get plan sponsors, you get advisors, they want to talk about IPS and all these, spend time in meetings talking about like asset class funds, when the vast majority of assets are going into like the target date fund decision, in my opinion, is the single most important investment decision that, the vast majority of plan sponsors are going to make, because that's, that's where all the money is kind of flowing into. But I actually think that target date funds, they're starting to get some hate in the industry. But it's interesting. It's the people who have a managed account solution.
And don't
but it's
have
interesting.
target
It's
date
the people who have a managed account
Talk
solution.
about the incentives
funds.
that you brought up.
Talk about the incentives. Exactly.
The folks who have target date funds want to talk about them all day. The folks who don't want to talk about managed accounts, because that's how they get their lion's share of the assets. So you always got to look at the source to where it's coming from. So
no question.
But yeah, I mean, target date funds are getting a bad rap, mainly from the people who don't have them. But, are target date funds a perfect solution? Of course not. There is no perfect solution. And as long as, if we can help somebody figure out what the best solution is for them at that time, then I think that, that's kind of what we need to be looking at is in the advisory community is how do we help that person at that time in their life with, what is probably the best option for them. I mean, obviously don't have to go into why target date funds make sense or why managed accounts make sense or why they don't, either one. There is no silver bullet here. But if we make sure that people know that they have access to a number of different opportunities, they're going to make hopefully the right decision for them.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's, where the trend is obviously going in terms of it's not a binary either or. It's either a target date, it's either a managed account, it's either an asset class. It's kind of a both and end approach. And really from an advisory perspective, stepping back and saying, okay, I'm going to focus more on being kind of the architect of not just the menu, but how it's implemented at the participant level. And so, and this is, I think, where a lot of value add can come with advisors, right? Is you architect the different participant investment solutions that are available. Hey, we're going to have target date funds. And this is the population that, it's going to fit within this employer. And then we have a managed account offering. And it's like, just like you said, like, hey, what are one of the three buckets? Are you a do-it-yourselfer? Are you, do it with me? Or are you a do it for me? But then thinking about the communication and the outreach and the engagement to help people identify which one of those kind of buckets at this point in time, because that could change, right? What do they fall into? And then making sure that they have a clear understanding of not just what's available, but how do they use it properly?
Yeah, a lot of it is like what you mentioned with the bumpers. It's we set up the guardrails, we give them kind of the track to run on, and then let them run. And, as long as we're going back every so often, checking in on folks, because let's face it, when people make a decision around their 401k plan, it's I always have joked it's kind of like joining the local fitness club. So many people sign up and never go back. And you want to make sure that, we're at least setting it up so it can be somewhat on autopilot. We got to be careful about that, but we want to have it so it's automated, at least for the short term, until we get a chance to go back and revisit. For most people, hopefully if they've done it right the first time, it's only a minor tweak going forward, if any. Again, a key to this is continuous conversations, because it's funny we talk about all the auto features and that's the ultimate guardrails, right? Auto enroll, auto increase, auto investment. We got to be careful we don't auto ourselves right out of a darn job. There's still things we need to be doing as advisors, as you mentioned, as the architect of that program. It's not just set it and forget it like the old infomercial.
Yeah. Ron Popeil, I used to use that, right? The set that when he'd get the crowd to chant, set it and forget it. 401ks and rotisserie chicken. As we kind of start to wrap up and one of the things we had talked about, most advisors that have been, it's funny, and I think this is more of an ego driver for people. they want to move up market. They think that moving up market, saying like I work with really large plans, and there are benefits to that, but there are also some downsides. And there, if you think about just the data, 95%, maybe even more of 401k plans in the United States are in the under $10 million space. And so you're moving up market. You're typically going head to head with really, really good advisors that are saying the same exact things that you are, that are really capable firms. Everybody kind of beating beating each other up. And it's nice to be able to say, I work with a 100, a 200, a $500 million plan, but there's so much opportunity down market. And you within your practice, you have, I think, a couple of hundred plans. You obviously have upmarket plans as well. But you had said that you really love that smaller end of the market, that kind of like $1 to $10 million space. Talk a little bit about why you like that market so much, and the opportunities you see kind of doing the opposite of what everybody else is doing, where everybody wants to go up. You're saying, hey, I actually really like it down market.
Yeah.
And here are the reasons why.
The first thing I really like about that market is you're generally building a relationship with the business owner, their key people who are probably going to be with that group for quite a while. You're building a relationship with people that can last a long time. And
there's continuity of relationship.
Continuity, but you get to know people, and right, wrong, or indifferent. I tend to look at a lot of my clients as friends. Just because I've got to know them, over the years. I know their families. Some of the clients I walk in, and the employees know me more than just, hey, there's the 401k guy. They actually know me. They know about my family. I know about their family. So it's always great to. It's like going to a family reunion when you go to an enrollment meeting, which is fun. So the relationship part of it really. Is something that I enjoy. But it's also the opportunity that we get to help people in a way that they otherwise would never get that help. There just are not a lot of good advisors focusing on the smaller end. Kind of like what you talked about. They're all chasing the bigger stuff. And unfortunately, I think that smaller end of the market is completely neglected. And I feel that if we can go in and work with that 20, 25 person company where you do get to know people by name. They're not just some person you recognize from the participant roster. You get to know these people. There's some enjoyment out of that. And it also goes back to the light bulb thing, to get someone to get it and feel like you've made an actual difference in their life, even if it's a small one. That's just really cool. That's kind of what gets me out of bed every day. It's to try to make a difference in people's lives. I know it sounds kind of corny, but it really is pretty darn cool when you get a chance to do that. Not many people in this world get to do that.
Yeah. It's interesting. Fees are not linear in the industry, right? So as you go up market, once you get over a certain threshold of plan size, you really start to see fees start to level. You start to see them level off. And up market, it is competitive. Your clients, because they're more visible, they're constantly getting called on by legit competitors. So there's that element. As you said, I remember back in the day, the kind of the turnover in the C-suite with, my larger clients, and you constantly feel like you have to go back and kind of sell the relationship, or how many times that you have a committee and you get them to a decision point, and, you're going to kind of like, you've given them all the information, you've talked with them about it, like the next meeting, hey, we're going to make a decision on this. And then you find out in the interim that like, hey, so-and-so who was on the committee, they left and they went somewhere else. And it's like, you got to start over again. Those smaller plans, if you scope them the right way, you can do really good work. They can be really profitable. Quite frankly, you can differentiate because, like you said, in the small market, because it's neglected, there's not a lot of really good specialist firms that are focusing on that market. You can build a lot more continuity and loyalty in those relationships, which actually translates into, at the end of the day, it's funny, I think advisors, and there's still a lot of advisors that try to compete on whether or not they're a fiduciary, which is table stakes. And quite frankly, being a fiduciary is easy. Being a really effective one is a lot harder. And when you've got that continuity of relationship and you really know what you're doing, you actually can stick with committees and get them to make a lot of progress over 3, 5, 10, 15-year periods because you've maintained that relationship. And I would just say the last thing, like a lot of times those clients, they may be a little less sophisticated as buyers, if you will. But they tend to be really loyal. They tend to take your advice, and they tend not to be as much a pain in the neck and demanding as a lot of plans up market. So, for advisors listening, I would tell you, and I think maybe Jim would probably stay the same, though in his local market, he'd appreciate it if you kind of like were hands off. But like that small end of the market, one, super neglected. Most American workers work for small businesses. There's a lot of great that you can do. And there's a lot of opportunity down there to build a really, really good business that has staying power over time. Yeah.
And I will say, I had this conversation with somebody this morning. When you've got a lot of these smaller clients, you're not at risk of having one big client gets acquired.
Right.
I mean, I think we've all been affected by mergers and acquisitions at some level. We get the emails far more frequent than I'd like, but we get the emails from the clients saying, hey, it's bittersweet, but we've been acquired and our plan's going to go away. And there's nothing you can do about it. And it's frustrating because you didn't do anything wrong. But if your practice is built on all big plans like that are, have a big price tag associated with them, and one of them gets bought or a couple of them get bought. I was talking to somebody this morning and they said, they're a wholesaler and they're like, I'm seeing practices that, they're a couple M&As away from being out of business. And it's
interesting. That's a great point though, around like, right. It's the diversification of revenue risk.
Yeah. So, I mean, if we've lost quite a few plans. I mean, when you have 200 plans, the odds you're losing one to M&A goes way up. We've lost a bunch of plans over the last 2 years to M&A. And yeah, it hurts. It's a punch to the gut, but we've been able to sustain it because it ends up being a small portion of our overall revenue and our overall client base. So, so it's been
great insight.
It's been comforting in that way that we can still budget for. I mean, because let's face it, we are still running a business. There's a lot of feel good to this, but we're running a business and we need to be profitable.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So I typically wrap up these episodes with a question, and I'm going to pose it to you: is what would be, because this podcast and Fiduciary You really is kind of a brand and platform, is really about helping make ERISA fiduciaries smarter. That's kind of one of my personal missions, is I want to teach people to be better ERISA fiduciaries. What would be your one best piece of advice to anyone who is either an ERISA fiduciary, maybe it's a community member, maybe it's an advisor, or anyone who supports people in that role? What would be your best piece of advice?
I'm going to go back to what I've been kind of preaching all along. Keep it simple, stupid. Figure out what the most important components are to what you need to get done within your plan, within your program, and focus on those things. Focus on making those things the best they can be. And if that's, shoring up your, selection and monitoring process, whether that's, getting a process in place with an advisor, whether they're a 338 fiduciary or a 321 fiduciary, either one, just make sure your process is in place. Making sure that process is sound. And don't overcomplicate things. I know we talked on a panel a couple of weeks ago about crypto and private equity in 401k plans. And, on the surface, that's a pretty quick discussion. No, you can't have it. At least not if I'm a 338 signing on it. But
right.
The conversation evolved pretty in a way I didn't expect, which was kind of neat. It was a lot of fun. It was the GOAT of all sessions. But you're just, again,
no bias.
No bias.
Definitely not.
That's purely an outsider's opinion.
I mean, I agree with you. I think you were right.
Yeah, again, it's keep everything simple. Let's not try to recreate the wheel here. The one we have is round and it works. And, let's not try to get so fancy that we outsmart ourselves. Keep everything simple, figure out what the most important components are of your program, and focus in on those and how do we make those things better. And once you've got those things down to a well-oiled machine, then you can start messing around with some of the, fancy new tricks that are out there that people are touting. But let's face it, most stuff in our industry is sold, not bought. Let's focus on just the basics. And once we get the basics down cold, then we can start messing around with the other stuff.
If you need to. I think that's wise. In a lot of ways, advisors spend way too much time trying to invent a better wheel. I love what you said. Like, we've got a wheel and it works, better to spend time paving the road ahead to try to make the ride a little bit smoother, if you will. So, well, this has been a lot of fun, Jim. Where can people go to stay connected with you? I'll put it in the show notes. What's the best way if people want to connect with you?
So I'm on LinkedIn. Pretty easy to find there. My website is hilbgroup401k.com, HILB group.com. So people can go to our website or catch me on LinkedIn. Those are probably the two best ways to find me.
Awesome. Well, Jim Sampson, thank you so much for a really good conversation and continued success to you. I have a lot of admiration for just your approach, your philosophy. Obviously, it's worked really, really well in the industry, and you've built a really good practice, and I imagine we'll continue to do so. So thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, Josh. It's been a lot of fun.